If you believe every heart has a story to tell, hit subscribe and stay close. Because here we speak in whispers and remember what it means to feel. My name is Claire and I have lived in this quiet town for 15 years, a place where the air smells like wet grass after rain and everyone knows everyone. I thought my life was settled. I thought peace had finally found me after years of chasing pieces of myself that kept breaking. I had a husband named Daniel. He was steady, kind of man of few words but full of old ghosts that sometimes passed through his eyes when he thought I was not watching, and I would wonder what those ghosts were, but I never asked because I had learned that some silences protect the heart. That afternoon the sky was pale gray, the kind that presses against your window and makes you remember things you thought you had forgotten. I was baking bread in the kitchen. The radio was playing softly and the clock ticked like it always did, steady, unbothered, when suddenly the doorbell rang once, twice, 3 times, like the sound did not want to leave. I wiped my hands and walked to the door, and when I opened it I saw her, a woman maybe in her 40s, her eyes tired, her face carrying both time and stories, her coat damp from the drizzle outside. She looked at me as if she had seen a ghost or maybe found something she had lost long ago. She said my name softly, Claire. I froze because she said it like she knew me, like she had practiced it for years. I nodded, unsure, and she said, I am Laura, Daniel's ex-wife. For a moment everything inside me went still. I had heard her name once or twice in whispers of the past. Daniel never spoke ill of her, he simply said it ended, and that was that. I never asked for details because some doors you don't open, not if you want peace in your own home. But now she was standing right in front of me, flesh and rain and memory. She said, may I come in please? I won't stay long. Her voice trembled, not with fear but with something deeper, like regret or desperation. I stepped aside because that is what you do when life shows up uninvited. You still offer it a chair. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the living room, the photos on the mantel, the small vase of daisies that Daniel picked last Sunday. She smiled faintly and said, he still picks flowers, doesn't he? I nodded, not trusting my voice. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped together as if she was holding on to something invisible. I asked, would you like some tea? She said, no thank you, not yet, maybe later. There was a pause so heavy I could hear the rain on the roof. She looked at me, then at the window, then back at me, and said, I need to ask you for something I should have asked long ago, but I was too afraid. My heart started to beat faster. I thought she would ask for money or forgiveness or maybe to see him again, but what she said next cracked something deep inside me. She whispered, I need to know about my child. I stared at her, unsure what she meant. She said, I need to know if he is alive, if he is safe, if Daniel ever told you about him, because I have been searching for so long. The room seemed to shrink. The clock stopped ticking in my mind, and all I could hear was her breathing, soft and uneven. I said, I don't understand. Daniel never told me anything about a child. She closed her eyes for a moment as if the truth she feared had just arrived. She said, we lost touch after the divorce. I was young, foolish, angry. I left town, and by the time I came back everything was gone. He was gone, and so was the baby. The hospital said the records were sealed. He told me nothing. I felt my knees weaken. I sat across from her and said, Laura, I swear I didn't know. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She said, I believe you, but please, if you know anything, if he ever mentioned even a name, I need to know because I am running out of time. The way she said it made my chest tighten. I asked, running out of time? She smiled a broken smile and said, I am sick, Claire, and I don't want to leave this world without knowing what happened to my son. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The rain kept falling. The bread in the oven started to burn and the smell of it mixed with the heaviness in the room. I finally said, Daniel will be home soon. Maybe you should wait and ask him yourself. She looked scared like a child and said, do you think you will see me? I said, yes, I think he should. She nodded, then looked around again, her eyes landing on a photo of Daniel at the lake holding a small boy, a neighbor's child. I explained quickly that it was our friend's son, but she still stared at the picture as if she wanted to step inside it. We waited in silence, the light outside fading into that golden hour where everything looks softer than it really is. She told me little pieces of her story, how she left because she was lost, how she thought she would find herself somewhere else but ended up losing everything. She said Daniel was a good man, he didn't deserve the mess I made of our life, and I said, he never said a bad word about you. She smiled through her tears and said, that sounds like him, always protecting others from pain even when it eats him alive. The door opened, then footsteps on the wooden floor, Daniel's voice calling my name. He stopped when he saw her, his face drained of color, his eyes wide like the past had just walked through his front door. He said, Laura, what are you doing here? She stood up trembling and said, I need to. No, Daniel, please tell me, where is he? Where is our child? He froze, his lips parted, but no words came out. He just stood there looking at her as if the years between them vanished. I watched him and I saw a man torn between guilt and love and something else, something buried so deep he could barely breathe. He whispered, "Laura, I thought you knew," and she shook her head, crying, "No one ever told me. Please don't make me die not knowing." And that was when I realized whatever truth waited in that room would change everything we thought we knew about our life, about our love, about the quiet peace we built on top of unspoken things. The room was so quiet that even the clock seemed afraid to move. Daniel stood near the door, his shoulders heavy, his eyes fixed on Laura as if she were a picture from another life that had suddenly stepped out of its frame. He said her name once low, almost like a prayer, then again stronger, "Laura, please sit down." She shook her head, "No, tell me the truth now." He took a slow breath, and for a moment I thought he would walk away, but instead he sank into the chair across from her, his hands trembling. He said, "After you left I tried to find you. I wrote letters, I called the number you gave me, but it was gone. And when I heard you had left the state, I thought you didn't want either of us anymore. The baby," he paused, looking toward the window. "Our baby was born too soon. The doctors said he wouldn't make it. I signed papers, I buried him myself. Then I broke. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell anyone." Laura's knees gave out and she sat hard on the edge of the couch, her eyes wide and empty. She whispered, "No, I would have come back. I would have held him. I would have said goodbye." Daniel nodded, tears falling into his hands. "I know. But I was angry and ashamed. I thought I was protecting you. I told myself it would be easier if you thought I'd taken him somewhere safe. But the truth is I just couldn't watch you break. I watched the two of them the way old love still knew where to touch, even through pain. And something inside me ached for both of them. Because sometimes the cruelest part of love is what we keep from the ones we want to spare." Laura reached for the small blue box she had brought and set it between them. "This was his," she whispered, "the hospital bracelet, the only thing they let me keep. I carried it for 20 years thinking he was out there somewhere." She opened the box, her fingers shaking. Inside was a tiny band of plastic with fading letters, a date, a name that read "Baby Boy." Daniel touched it as if it were made of light. He said, "I wanted to tell you so many times, but every time I tried the words died in my throat. And then I met Claire and she gave me peace I didn't deserve." I said softly, "You both deserve peace," and Laura looked at me through her tears and said, "No one deserves to carry this kind of silence." For a long while we just sat there listening to the rain. Finally Daniel stood and said, "There's a place I go sometimes by the lake. There's a small stone there with his name. If you want we can go together." She nodded slowly and said, "Yes, please." We drove out through the edge of town where the road turns to gravel and the lake lies still like a secret. The sky was clearing, the clouds breaking apart, letting the last gold light touch the water. Daniel walked ahead carrying the small box, Laura behind him clutching her coat. When we reached the stone he knelt, wiped away the leaves that had gathered there. The name was still there, worn but kind. "Baby William." Laura fell to her knees and touched the stone, whispering his name again and again until her voice was only wind. Daniel put his arm around her, and for the first time since she had arrived there was no anger, no distance, just two people bound by a loss that never stopped breathing. I stood back a few steps, giving them that moment. I watched them and I thought of how love never really leaves, it only changes its shape, sometimes into grief, sometimes into gratitude. As the sun went down, Laura stood and looked at me, her eyes red but steady. She said, "Claire, thank you for letting me come. And for standing here with us." I smiled and said, "You don't need to thank me, we're all standing for the same reason, to let him rest." She nodded, then looked at Daniel. "Promise me you'll keep the stone clean." He said, "I promise." We drove home in silence, the kind that doesn't need words. When we reached the house, Laura said she'd go back to her motel, she didn't want to intrude any longer. But before she left she touched my hand and said, "Claire, I thought I came here for answers, but I think I came here for peace." After she drove away, Daniel and I sat together on the porch, the night air cool around us. He said, "I never told you about him because I didn't know how to." And I said, "You just did." He smiled a tired smile and leaned his head on my shoulder. And for the first time I felt the house breathe again, as if it too had been holding its breath all those years. The weeks after that day felt softer somehow, as if the air itself had finally put down the weight it was carrying. Laura stayed in town a little longer. She said she wanted to walk by the lake every morning and talk to the water because she felt her son there. Sometimes I went with her and we did not speak much. We just listened to the ripples and to the sound of our own hearts trying to learn a new language made of forgiveness. Daniel changed too. He moved slower, he smiled more often, but there was always a flicker of sorrow behind his eyes. Each evening he would leave a single flower on the porch rail, a small quiet offering that said more than words ever could. One morning Laura knocked on our door again, her face pale but calm. She said she had been to the doctor and they told her the illness was growing inside her like a stubborn season that refused to end. She said, "I am not afraid, Claire, but I don't want to go alone." I asked her what she needed and she said time, just a little time to say what I never said. So she began coming by in the afternoons. She would sit in the old chair by the window where the sun fell warm across her hands. She talked about the boy she never held. About the choices that sent her running. About the strange mercy of ending up in front of our house after all these years. And I listened. Because sometimes listening is the only kind of healing there is. Daniel often stood outside working on the fence pretending not to hear, but I knew every word found him through the open window. One day she looked up and said, "You must hate me for the pain I brought here." I told her, "No, I don't hate you. Because without your story there would be no us." And she smiled, that small trembling smile that belongs to people who have finally stopped running. Autumn came early that year, the air smelled of wood smoke and goodbye. Laura grew thinner, but her spirit seemed lighter, as if she was already halfway to somewhere peaceful. She told me, "Claire, when I first saw you, I wanted to despise you. You were everything I could not be. But now I see you were meant to finish what I started. You gave him the peace I prayed for. Thank you for that." I held her hand and said, "You gave him the love that taught him how to love me." We completed each other without ever meaning to. The last afternoon she visited, the sky was the color of silver glass. She stood by the porch looking toward the hills and said, "Promise me you'll take him there when the first snow falls. He'll need to see that the world keeps moving even when hearts don't." I promised. That night she called from the motel, her voice barely a whisper. She said, "Claire, tell him I found our boy in every sunrise. Tell him I'm free now." Then the line went quiet. The next morning the hospital called. And even though I had expected it, the news still broke something inside me that words couldn't reach. Daniel and I drove to the lake. He carried the same small blue box. He knelt by the stone and placed the bracelet beside it. And then he whispered her name to the wind. I stood behind him and watched the ripples spread across the water. And I thought of Laura's smile, of her courage, of how love can hurt and heal in the same breath. When we got home, the house felt different. Not emptier, just deeper. As if it finally understood that grief is only love that has learned to live in silence. The morning came softer than it had in months. The sky was the color of forgiveness. And the air outside my window felt almost kind. I stood in the kitchen where so much had been broken. And I let the kettle hum its low song. Because sometimes that little sound feels like proof that the world still turns. Daniel sat by the window. His shoulders smaller somehow. And the light on his face made him look both older and younger at once. Like time couldn't decide what to do with him. He said he had dreamed of her again. The woman who once stood at my door. And in that dream she wasn't angry. She was holding a photograph of our life. And she whispered that it was time to let go. I didn't know what to say. So I poured him tea and we sat there. The silence between us no longer cruel. Just full of tired understanding. He told me how shame had eaten him. How he had tried to rewrite his past through guilt. And how it only built more walls between us. I listened. Because sometimes listening is the last act of love left to give. And in that quiet I realized that forgiveness is not a door you open for someone else. It is a small window you open for yourself. To breathe again. The kettle cooled. The clock forgot to tick. And outside the neighbor's wind chime sang like a memory trying to heal. Later that day, we walked to the little park by the edge of town, where the trees still remembered our laughter from years ago, when everything felt simpler. Daniel spoke about leaving for a while. A journey to the coast where he could make peace with the woman she used to be. Not to escape me, but to understand the man he had become. I nodded. And I told him that I would stay. That this home still had pieces of all of us. And that maybe it was my turn to rebuild it into something honest. He reached for my hand. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't pull away. The sunset fell slow and wide across the fields. Like the sky itself wanted to say it was sorry for all the storms it had thrown at us. I thought about the woman who had come to my door that day. The one who had asked me for something I couldn't give. And how in her eyes I had seen a reflection of my own pain. How she had unknowingly taught me the hardest lesson of all. That love does not survive by being perfect. It survives by being forgiven. As night came, I lit a candle on the porch. One small light against a wide dark world. And I whispered into the quiet that sometimes the ones who break us also show us where the cracks let the light in. He left on a Thursday morning. The air still smelled like rain. And the sky hung low like it was trying to listen. His suitcase was small. He said he didn't need much. Just a few clothes and a notebook. Some space to remember who he was before the noise. I stood at the gate watching him. The gravel crunching under his shoes. Each sound like a goodbye I hadn't learned to say. He turned once and smiled. That kind of quiet smile that knows it has broken something, but still wishes to be forgiven. When he was gone, the house didn't echo anymore. It sighed. It breathed. As if it too had been holding its breath for years. I walked through every room, touching the walls like they were old friends. Each one carrying whispers of what we used to be. In the living room, the photograph still sat crooked on the mantel. The one from our wedding day. The one I had almost thrown away. But didn't. I looked at the faces. So young. So sure. So unaware of the roads that twist even the strongest hearts. For the first time I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I finally understood something. That love doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. It becomes quieter. Wiser. Softer. Days passed like pages turning themselves. And I began to cook again. Water the plants. Walk to the small bookstore in town. The owner, an old friend who always saved me a chair by the window. I would sit there, reading letters from strangers, imagining their lives, their regrets, their joys, their unfinished stories. One afternoon, a letter arrived for me. No return address. Just my name written in his handwriting. Inside was a single line. No apology. No promise. Just, "Thank you for keeping the light on." I read it again and again. Because sometimes gratitude speaks louder than love ever could. I placed the letter in the old wooden box, next to the seashell our daughter once found at the beach. And I whispered a prayer. Not for him to return, but for both of us to finally rest. The days turned into weeks. And I found myself learning the art of small joys. A warm cup of coffee. Fresh sheets. The sound of rain against the porch. Life became something simple again. Not perfect. Not repaired. But peaceful. Then one evening, months later, a knock came at the door. It wasn't him. It was the woman. His past. The one who had once stood there trembling in my doorway. asking for pieces of my life I wasn't ready to share. She looked different now. Older. Tired. But gentler somehow. And she carried a small envelope in her hands. She said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come before. I was angry. And lost. And I didn't see the whole picture." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. And I saw the same sorrow I'd carried for years reflected back at me. She handed me the envelope. And said, "He asked me to give you this if I ever saw you again." Inside was another letter. Written in that same slow, careful way he always wrote when he meant something. It said, "If you're reading this, then you've both found the courage I never did. Please know that what broke us was never hate. It was fear. And if love still lives anywhere in the spaces between us, let it be kind. Let it be enough." I closed my eyes. And for the first time, the weight lifted. The woman and I sat on the porch together. Two hearts once torn apart. Now quiet in shared understanding. The candlelight flickered between us. And I realized forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a lifetime of choosing peace over pain.